What we are seeing right now is, I think, a lot different than what a lot of us were expecting. Obviously, towards, I guess, December, November of last year, we were expecting that Trump was going to be kind of the more preferential candidate for crypto. I think we could say so far, obviously, while we don't know what the alternative would have been, so far things have not been looking particularly rosy. And so I want to discuss a little bit about why, because obviously we've seen kind of, crash after crash, crash after crash after crash, and prices have been a little bit depressed. We are obviously in extreme fear right now. We'll get into that here in a little bit in a second, but I want to discuss kind of a bigger picture. What does this mean? What could it, what's behind these types of crashes? What is kind of the short, middle, and long-term type of plan here? At least how I'm seeing it within the market. So anyway, let's go ahead. We'll dive right in. Starting out, I want to take a look at crypto bubbles. We can obviously see that basically everything red. We do have a couple greens here and there. Looking at the weekly as well, almost everything red here. We've got a couple tiny greens kind of on the fringes over here, and then Bitcoin Cash as well, also green for the week. But mostly everything is red, and it's very, very red. I mean, we could see 20 to 30% drawbacks basically across the board here. So things obviously looking not particularly great. And then obviously on the month, we can see a couple greens here and there, but still a whole lot of red going on. And if we look at the market overview, this pretty much indicates exactly that. If we look, we can see the market is in extreme fear. If we look at the fear and greed index, if we look at the past week, it's either been kind of a combination of extreme fear and fear, 3 days in extreme fear, 4 days in fear. So we've kind of moved from a primarily greed-based market into a primarily fear-based market, and that's probably where it looks to where we might be for the next little while. We can see on the RSI heat maps, things were kind of up in kind of this neutral area. The market average has kind of moved into weak, and some more coins even actually moving down into oversold. So a lot of things going on there. We also can see that the open interest on Bitcoin specifically has really started to climb back down a little bit. We can see open interest at about 47 billion, down from the high of about 67 billion. So about $20 billion of value closed off on this open interest. And obviously we can see kind of the price of Bitcoin following down kind of in suit with this as well. We also can see that on the liquidation maps, there's still very, very large liquidation walls to the upside here, which would indicate liquidating shorts. Not really much left to get to the downside. There's been a lot of longs liquidated. Just today, about $616 billion. We can see here in the past 24 hours. Like I said, 616 million. Excuse me. I think I said billion. And then we can also see 525 of that being longs and about 90 of that being shorts. So obviously the 90 is, I think, a lot of what people. When we started to see that breakdown, people getting in and going way, way, way too high of leverage. And then, obviously the longs are just, we saw the levels at about 82 to 80,000 getting broken. Obviously we could see a pretty strong level of support kind of at like this 82 and also at like this 81 range. Obviously we did see this wick down into the high 70s, but a lot of people I think were kind of expecting the supports to be in this range. We did break through that. A lot of liquidations were had because of that. And now we are starting to see a little bit of a bounce up, but again, how high this bounce goes, a lot of this type of stuff is really, really hard to say for sure. We are kind of moving towards the bottom of this Bollinger Band, so I don't expect too much coming down to the downside here, at least in the short term. Obviously, it can trend down like we've been seeing basically ever since like the end of January. It's kind of been just a downtrend this whole time. We did see a little bit of some boring price action here, and then obviously that break to the downside. And then recently, we've just seen a ton of volatility. I think a lot of what we're seeing going on here is kind of this weird dichotomy between the kind of market fundamentals being, I would say, kind of fundamentally bearish in the short term. And then we're seeing a lot of like really exciting crypto regulation, crypto news, a lot of like institutional adoption, a lot of like multinational and national adoption, a lot of that type of stuff. So that's obviously really positive. So we're getting a lot of volatility in here because people want to buy the positive news and the bullish news, but the kind of wider macro market is just too bearish for it to really kind of have any sort of sustained pump, which is why we've seen even this really nice green candle here came basically right back down. So I think that's a lot of what we're seeing is, and I think this is a really important lesson for all of us to note, is that macroeconomics plays so much more, so much larger of an impact than maybe what some of us may have initially expected. And so that's what's always really, really important to note here, is you can't ignore macroeconomics, right? I think everybody kind of knew that with altcoins particularly, but I think Bitcoin maybe might have been one that the people weren't necessarily expecting this from. And so this has been something that we just kind of need to keep as a reminder that macro is always the most important thing. That's what's going to move the markets. And essentially people moving into this risk off position is of course more adversely affecting crypto over anything else. The normal like traditional equities markets are also having a rough time as well. So this is just kind of something that is happening kind of throughout the entire market. And of course, since crypto is the most risk on, this is why we're seeing so much of just kind of like selling and panic and all this type of stuff everywhere. However, if you are looking to trade some of this chop, some of this volatility, any of that type of stuff, I do have the links in the description below. I do have that 10% bonus on first time deposits to BTCC, as well as extra bonuses of up to $10,055 per user with up to 500x leverage, although I would strongly discourage anything above probably even 10 to 20x. You really need to know what you're doing to leverage trade really at all. So just make sure that you know what you're doing if you are going to leverage trade. And then they obviously have a ton of flexible leverage options for you there. And then no VPN or KYC necessary. Really easy to place trades. You can see I do have this Bitcoin trade open. I took a long as we started to see the squeeze going on here. And then obviously, of course, we have seen that move to the downside here. It was a very relatively low leverage play though. So I'm not particularly worried. And that's why I take low leverage plays, is because you can kind of withstand some of these types of moves before, potentially seeing a run back up to the upside. So something just to consider there. And then you can always, of course, double, and kind of DCA into your position as the price continues to go down. If you are looking, you don't always have to kind of go all in or all out. I've mentioned this kind of a couple times in more recent videos, just because I think people kind of need a little bit of that reminder. I definitely did when I was when I was getting started. So just something to think about there. Moving on though, I want to talk a little bit about what we've seen in the markets recently. And so what we can see, and this is kind of, I would say, been kind of the similar messaging from both Trump and Scott Bessent, is that essentially over the short term, they're expecting and they're essentially okay with the fact that we might feel some short-term pain, but over the medium term, which is what they're focused on, it's essentially they're focused on Main Street, they're focused on kind of bringing costs down, a lot of that type of stuff. But I think the way that they're viewing this short-term type of period is there has to be a little bit of some resetting, some level setting, a lot of that type of stuff. I think primarily tariffs is the thing they're looking at primarily. And so that's something that obviously is going to cause a little bit of pain in the short term. And then I think the hope is that in the longer term, maybe that they'll kind of pull themselves out of that a little bit. But I think they're kind of already expecting short-term pain. And I think there's a lot of reasons as to why this is going to be important for the US specifically, and then also why this could be positive news for crypto in the more medium to long-term time frame, not in the short-term time frame. And so this is why I wanted to focus on why this crash is maybe not exactly what people think, because I think there's a lot of general sentiment of a couple of different things. One I hear is we're going into the new bear market, and the bear market's going to be this kind of multi-year, just absolutely catastrophic thing that happens where people are, essentially like the whole crypto industry dries up and goes away, and we kind of wait for some signs of life. And then there's the other kind of side of this, which is this is like the biggest bear trap in history. We're essentially going to we're going to level out here at some point, and then it's going to be up to the moon. I think, I don't really think either of those are particularly, at least I don't subscribe to either of those. Generally, what I would say is I'm expecting in the short term crypto to continue to kind of do poorly, but I don't expect it to be this kind of multi-year slog. I think it's going to be a little bit quicker than what people think. I think right now what we're expecting or what we're seeing is a lot of people trying to de-risk from crypto, right? I mean, there's kind of this expectation being set by the people making the policies themselves that the economy might struggle a little bit over the kind of short term. What the short term means, I don't know. I'm not sure that anybody really knows what the short term means, but because of that, there's a lot of people essentially selling out of crypto trying to de-risk. And so because of that, obviously, any hope for kind of, positive price appreciation and movements in the short term probably pretty unlikely. And so that's something that I'm kind of looking at and kind of expecting going forward. Obviously, I'm not looking to sell any of my positions because I really have only been getting into quality positions. And most of the like short-term tradey positions, I've either told you kind of over the past several months that I'm not looking to like accumulate or hold any of these like more tradey type positions. And any of the ones that I am looking to hold, I feel comfortable with because they're very, very strong projects. Obviously, you know, it's always best to try and buy in as low as you can get, but you never know what that's going to be for sure. And so that's kind of what I've just been wading through and trying to like, you know, figure out, you know, will we see a bounce now? And it's hard to say for sure, right? I mean, things could turn around tomorrow. I find that unlikely given the little bit of the clearer picture that we are getting from the administration. It seems to me that that is unlikely. I think we are going to be seeing probably several months at least of some of this type of struggle and difficulty, in which case crypto will not be doing particularly well at any point in that time, right? And so I do think it's probably wise to at least consider, you know, if you are overexposed or things like that to crypto, maybe just make sure that you're not having any sort of like short-term liquidity needs or anything that you would have to sell out of crypto for. That would be a pretty difficult position, I would say, if that's something that you're in. As I always say, you should never be trading with anything you can't afford to lose. I kind of look at that the same way. And one thing that I would say is kind of worth looking into, or worth considering at least as we go through this kind of short-term thing, is this is when, like, I know a lot of you are probably going to leave, you're going to get bored, you're going to go away. That's just kind of inevitable with this type of thing. But what I would strongly encourage you to consider is look for a lot of these projects that you were looking at in, you know, November, December, maybe even early January, and just look at them now, right? I mean, Ondo's one that has been kind of continually talked about to be a really strong project. That's on a major discount from what it was previously. We've got other ones like HBAR. HBAR's down a little bit. Some of the big ones like Cardano and XRP, those haven't really fallen too much. I think we might see them fall at some point. Pi's one that's been kind of gathering a lot of attention. That one's been falling decently. There's a lot of these that are potentially really, really strong, solid projects that are at massive, massive discounts. And so if you believed in these 2-3 months ago, why would you not pick them up at extreme discounts from what we've been seeing, right? So that's just something to think about. That's kind of one of the things that I'm looking at, and one of the things that I'm expecting that we should be seeing over the next kind of several months is we probably will continue to start to see some of the bleeding, a lot of that type of stuff. But midterm, a lot of what this is probably going to force is interest rates being lowered, the money printers potentially getting turned on worldwide. And a lot of this, as we do all know, is good for crypto generally. And so I think crypto in the medium to long term is going to be a lot more kind of exciting and high growth and a lot of this type of stuff. And I also think it'll be a little bit more sustainable as well, because if this plan works and Main Street gets, you know, a little bit more, more in their pocket and a lot of that type of stuff, they've got more kind of throwing around money. I do think this could be what brings in a very, very crazy alt season, one that we were kind of maybe hoping or expecting this year, but it may not happen this year, right? It could happen towards the end of the year. It could even happen early to middle to end of next year. But I think, at least in my opinion, for what we're seeing, just kind of based on the macroeconomics and the macro conditions, probably nothing that we're going to be seeing in the short term, just because it looks like the headwinds are a little bit too much for that. But it is going to lead into what I think is probably going to be very, very ideal conditions for crypto. So anyway, we'll have to see. Who knows for sure? Obviously, nothing that I've said is financial advice. This is just kind of my opinions. Obviously, a lot of what we're seeing right now is kind of this grand economic experiment. I'm not sure that anybody really knows what's going to happen for sure, least of all me. So just make sure that, obviously these are my opinions. You obviously should be doing your own research. Maybe validate my claims, validate kind of the theory and the logic that I have behind it. It makes sense to me, but it may not make sense to you if you kind of analyze it a little bit deeper. So anyway, hopefully you found the information in this video useful. If you did, a like and a subscribe really, really does help me out. Also, any comments that you want to drop in the comment section, I do read and respond to all of those. So if you have anything that you want me to see, that'd be a great way to do so. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.